listener production.
Hey, it's Helen Smith here with you. Welcome to The Briefing. How close are we to having driverless cars roaming our streets? And despite Australia leading the world in the development of autonomous vehicle technology, America has beat us to it.
They're operating on normal Los Angeles streets in the area that they operate. There haven't been a lot of changes made to the roads or anything like that. They basically just fit into the existing road network.
So could we see something similar happening here in Australia? And would you trust the tech? That's coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Tara Cassidy. It's Thursday, the 24th of July.
Hey Helen, and to you listening, we're starting this morning overseas where the world's top court has ruled countries have a legal duty to prevent the harms of climate change or face hefty fines and other consequences. Yesterday, the International Court of Justice published a landmark advisory opinion saying climate breakdown has wide-reaching consequences and is an urgent existential threat to people across the globe and our natural ecosystems. And among the things it was saying that countries are liable for when it comes to climate harm is fossil fuels, which was high up on the list, stating that any countries that grant fossil fuel exploration licenses, subsidies, or produce or consume fossil fuels could be found in breach.
Yeah, and it says that that's due to its impact on greenhouse gas emissions and could constitute an international wrongful act, with coal, oil and gas the main sectors in the firing line. The move reflects the same pledge made by more than 190 countries, including Australia, as part of the Paris Agreement, where they agreed to move away from such industries in a bid to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. The US is the only country that's so far withdrawn from that agreement, a move made by President Donald Trump.
Yeah, and now this is an interesting one, Helen, because only last week we saw that federal court ruling over the Torres Strait Islands where there was those First Nation traditional owners that were arguing with the Australian government saying it breached its duty of care to protect them by not taking action against climate change and reducing emissions, this exact argument. And they were saying it was impacting where they were living. But unfortunately, in that case, it was dismissed. The justice said that any arguments around these targets are more a matter for Parliament and not the court. But he did criticise the Australian government and its climate efforts and emission targets and warned that residents do risk losing their way of life if something's not done.
And I think we're only going to see more legal and court action when it comes to climate change. And even in Australia, just this week we've seen the federal government step in with the algal bloom that's killing marine life across South Australia in particular, giving $14 million in federal funding. So I think, look, there is more pressure mounting every day from the public for our government and the world to do more and say that this is a global issue.
Australia has made a second payment of $800 million to the US for the controversial Aukus nuclear agreement. It brings the total payments to $1.6 billion, despite Trump's administration ordering a review into the Aukus deal just last month, Helen.
And to give you a bit of a recap, Aukus is that multi-billion-dollar submarine deal between long-standing allies, Australia, the UK and the US, hence the name, which is an acronym for the nations. And it's meant to increase our defence. But some experts say it's believed to be about countering China's growing presence in the Indo-Pacific region as well. Now, this agreement would see Australia buying nuclear submarines from the US ahead of its own being built in Adelaide. And we're also paying the UK about $4.6 billion to assist with its shipbuilding industry. But the PM has assured Australia that the plan is running smoothly.
There's a schedule of payments to be made. We have an agreement with the United States as well as with the United Kingdom. It's about increasing their industrial capacity, but as part of that as well, we have Australians on the ground learning those skills.
Okay, Albo. Well, this latest payment to the US was confirmed by our Defence Minister, Richard Marles, and he says that it's in line with Australia's commitment to contribute US $2 billion by the end of 2025, with a further one due later this year. Now, critics of the deal have flagged concerns over the power of the US and what its Navy holds, as the agreement mandates that before any submarine can be sold to Australia, with the first sale forecast for 2032, that the US must decide whether relinquishing a submarine would first diminish the US Navy's undersea capability, pretty much to see if it still benefits them.
Yeah, and US government figures show that the US's submarine fleet numbers are a quarter below their target, meaning they're producing boats at half the rate they need just to service their own needs, let alone Australia. A fourth person has been charged in connection with the death of actor Mathew Perry. Dr. Salvador Placencia pleaded guilty to giving Perry ketamine in the month leading up to his overdose, admitting guilt to 4 counts of distribution of ketamine in the federal court in Los Angeles.
The doctor previously pleaded not guilty, but agreed to plead in exchange for 3 additional counts of distribution of ketamine and 2 counts of falsifying records to be dropped. However, prosecutors outlined that Dr. Placencia did not sell Perry the dose that killed the actor. The charges Dr. Placencia is facing can carry a maximum sentence of 40 years in prison, but he will remain free out on bond until his sentencing on the 3rd of December this year.
3 others, Perry's personal assistant, his friend and another doctor, all pled guilty last year in exchange for their cooperation, with none of them being sentenced yet. The last defendant, who has not yet reached an agreement, who prosecutors allege is a drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, and the person who sold Perry the lethal dose. Her trial is scheduled to begin next month, and she has also pleaded not guilty.
Yes, our houses in the middle of our streets are getting pricier, Helen. Prices have risen in every state and territory in the country for the first time in 4 years, with interest rate cuts leading to a flurry of buying and more confidence in the market. According to Domain, more than 1,700 Aussie suburbs saw jumps in property prices, with Perth seeing some of the largest and just 400 seeing a decline. Now, interestingly, we can also see the breakdown of the most expensive suburbs to the least, and any guesses which suburb in the country has the most expensive median property price, Helen?
Look, I'm guessing somewhere in Sydney, eastern suburbs?
Yes, very good. Shock horror. Bellevue Hill in Sydney, New South Wales. Median house price there, a whopping $9.9 million.
Oh my God.
Followed by Vaucluse on $7 million. Meanwhile, the highest median price properties in Victoria were in Toorak at $3.9 million, Helen.
Wow, a lot of money there. And in Queensland, Mermaid Beach on the Gold Coast, where you used to live there, Tara, albeit renting, and you mentioned they have this lovely strip called the Millionaire's Lane, all the beautiful mansions along the beach. And in WA, Dalkeith was the priciest suburb, and in South Australia, Beaumont, where the priciest homes will set you back $1.8 million. So some pretty big disparities there across the country. Now, I did have a squiz at where you can also buy the cheapest properties in the country. And for a measly $85,000, Tara, you can buy yourself a house in Cooper Pedy in South Australia.
Okay.
Queenstown in Tasmania for $175,000.
Wow.
Or if Outback Queensland's calling you, Charleville or Collinsville, you can buy a property for a similar price. Something tells me we won't be packing our bags for any of those suburbs anytime soon.
No, those suburbs in Outback Queensland are very hot, too much for my liking. But meantime, when it comes to those property prices we were talking about, for the rest of us average Joes, economists are predicting that we will continue to see this trend of increasing property prices if interest rates continue to go down. Again, great if you're a homeowner or investor, not so much if you're one of those people desperately trying to get into the market.
But bringing it back, annually, it looks like the only places that didn't go up overall were Darwin houses, units in Melbourne, and both houses and units in Canberra. So if you're trying to crack into the market, these places might be for you, but if you're looking for an investment, maybe steer clear.
Oh, I wish that we could stop this DIVORC.
sounds like we have taken that sweet old advice from Dolly Parton, Helen. We have booted Jolene and we are staying married. Our divorce rates are at their lowest in 50 years, with marriages now lasting longer, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And the new data shows a downward trajectory of both marriage and divorce rates over the past 2 decades, finding that Aussies are increasingly becoming more selective when it comes to tying the knot.
Yeah, it also found that we're putting off getting married until later in life, finding the average marital age for a woman is 31 and for men around 33, while the median age for divorce was 47 for men and 44 for women. However, I should put a caveat on some of this. While it found younger couple divorce rates were less, it also did find those in over 60s was rising.
So is that still potentially the people who got married very young? I don't know, all this screams to me is like, yes, do it later in life, take your time, find the right person and do not rush it. The older you are, Helen, I think the more chance you have of it lasting, or at least I hope so anyway. I'm getting married in 4 weeks, so let's just stay positive here.
Yeah, look, I have high hopes for you, Tara, but I am also finding that a lot of my friends, we're just, no one's into marriage anymore. There's not a need to get married like there used to be. And, non-binary, same-sex couples, you can get married, but if you're not religious, it's kind of like, it's just for legal reasons these days. So I think this stuff's so fascinating. It's interesting to see where we're heading in society and what's happening. And also, I always wanted to get divorced before 30, but I don't think that's going to happen now. But,
That is an interesting goal. Maybe we need to turn this around instead of having weddings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe what if we just go on like a bougie holiday? Like this is celebrating our love with a really bougie holiday.
Yeah, I
we'll
love
go and
that.
meet Chris over in Greece.
Yeah, that would be great. But that brings our headlines to a close for today. Coming up next is my deep dive looking into the world of driverless cars. How close are we to having them here, and are they as safe as they seem? Have a listen to that coming up next. Would you jump in a driverless car or taxi? You might have seen videos of Teslas changing lanes on their own, or even driverless taxis cruising the streets of San Francisco or LA. But what about right here in Australia? Well, driverless cars have been and are already being trialled on public roads right across the country. And while the tech's being used commercially in key industries like mining for years, why is Australia still behind in the autonomous car race? And it comes as new researchers found 1 in 5 Aussies are choosing to turn off their safety systems in their cars, with some drivers admitting to not trusting the technology. So these are functions like lane departure warnings, automatic emergency braking, and parking assist. So with all of this in mind, what would Australia look like with more driverless cars? Would you need to have a driver's license? Who would be liable in a crash? And would our roads need to change? Professor Michael Milford is the director of the Queensland University of Technology Centre for Robotics. Michael, how far off in Australia are we to having driverless cars on our roads as part of everyday life?
We could have driverless cars theoretically any time now. There's a couple of key considerations. The first is the whole regulatory and legal setup that has to be all ready and fit for purpose. A lot of progress has been made, but there's still some work to be done. The second and possibly most critical component is you need a major operator of robotaxis to be interested in and wanting to come into the Australian market. And so far, that hasn't yet happened at scale.
So do we have the tech and, more importantly, the infrastructure for driverless cars right now?
So any technology should theoretically not need much extra support, if any. And so the idea with robotaxis and autonomous vehicles has always been that they could come into existing Australian cities and roads and not really require governments to install a whole bunch of extra costly infrastructure. So I just got back from Los Angeles in the States, where I rode extensively in the Waymo robotaxis and got to really experience that. I've been riding autonomous vehicles for over a decade, but these were truly incredible to ride in. And one thing you notice is that they're operating on normal Los Angeles streets in the area that they operate. There haven't been a lot of changes made to the roads or anything like that. They basically just fit into the existing road network.
In Australia, we like LA, I guess, we drive a lot. Does our geography complicate things?
One of the differences between America at large and Australia is Australia has a lot more sparsely populated regional areas, but we still have lots of transport needs in those areas. And so autonomous vehicles are a commercially orientated technology in many ways. They need to earn money. And so they're naturally targeting those really dense urban environments like San Francisco and Los Angeles. One of the particular problems to Australia is we really want to make sure that we have a transport service that's available in rural and remote areas. And that's one of the areas that perhaps autonomous vehicles haven't had as much practice in, so to speak.
Moving on to some of Australia's current road laws and safety regulations when it comes to autonomous vehicles, are we starting from scratch legally? Do we will need to introduce a lot of laws and regulations? Do we already have some in place?
No, we do need to do a lot of work, and a lot of the work has been done. So over the last few years, especially the national and state governments, especially the areas relating to transport, have done a pretty extensive review of the laws and regulations, and of course discovered that, surprise, surprise, we weren't really ready for game time if autonomous vehicles suddenly turned up in large numbers in Australia. So the good news is there's been a lot of progress. Last year, there was an announcement of an automated vehicle safety law. The organisations involved are places like the National Transport Commission and, of course, the state and territory transport-related government departments. So they've all been working together to progress that. We're still not at the stage, as per my understanding, where you could just suddenly dump 1 million autonomous robotaxis, but we are much, much further ahead than we were 5 years ago.
So what happens if somebody crashes? Well, I guess if an autonomous vehicle crashes, who is liable?
So this is one of the important questions. And so you can consider there's really three parties involved. There's the person who is nominally using the vehicle, even if they can't really control it. There's a person who perhaps owns the vehicle, especially if it's a private autonomous vehicle. And then there's the company or operator of the rideshare fleet, if it's one of those central robotaxi fleets like we have in America. My understanding is that most of the responsibility will be on the central operator, where you jump in a robotaxi just like you jump in a taxi or an Uber. But again, the exact final details of how that will look in Australia, especially as you cross state boundaries, for example, are still to be finalised.
And like an Uber or taxi that you can just jump into, if you're jumping into one of these driverless cars, do you need a license to drive a car?
So I can speak to the experience I had just last month in Los Angeles. I don't know if that would be the final model, but it was very impressive for what it was. Basically, you just needed to have an app on your phone, just like you need an app for Uber, and you could book a car, it would turn up, you'd jump into it. I think I saw teenagers and people who perhaps did not have licenses using the service while I was over there, so I don't think they necessarily would have to have a license. I think having a license being a prerequisite is something that carries over from when people were expected to intervene if the car did something wrong. Nowadays, in those more mature services like Waymo is operating, the passengers definitely can't intervene. And in fact, you're regularly told to not touch the steering wheel. And some of the vehicles, some of the other operators using don't even have a steering wheel. And so you couldn't intervene even if you wanted to.
Moving back to some of the tech that's being used in these vehicles, where are we seeing it already being used in Australia and other industries?
So one thing that is still not perhaps widely known is that Australia genuinely led the world in the development of autonomous vehicle technology, but not in robotaxis initially. This was done in mining 10 or 20 years ago to automate both the underground mining trucks and also the mining trucks that operate above ground. And that's a technology that is relatively widespread in Australia and also through the world. And Australian researchers played a key role in developing that tech. Some of that tech is very similar to the tech that you'd see on a robotaxi operating on the roads, but obviously operating on public roads is a little bit different to operating deep underground in a mine. So there's been a bunch of additional work done on top of that.
If we were leading the way with this tech in the mining example that you just said, why are we so far behind in getting these driverless cars or the autonomous taxis on our roads compared to other countries?
So it's always interesting to see Australia as a relatively affluent, quite progressive country in terms of technology, but the rate at which we adopt different technologies does vary. Sometimes we lead the curve and sometimes we're a little bit behind. So I think the reason for us perhaps being a little bit behind in terms of large-scale rollouts of robotaxis, it's nothing to do with the technological talent or the interest in Australia. Again, I think this is probably primarily related to, for whatever reason, these big companies that are operating these autonomous vehicle fleets overseas have not yet seen sufficient reason to propose and come into Australia yet.
Do you think Australians have a bit of a negative attitude towards driverless cars, autonomous vehicles, or even just EVs, for example? Do you think that might be also part of the reason that we're being slow adopters?
I don't think Australians are particularly pessimistic, and I do like the skeptical attitude of a lot of Australians. We should always be cautious and skeptical regarding new technologies. I think first and foremost, if you mention things like autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles, some of it's just basic familiarity, and that's solved fairly quickly over time. And so if you take the examples of electric vehicles, which are a little bit more progressed in terms of the technology and rolling out in Australia, I think the average Australian is a lot more informed and open to things like electric vehicles than they were just a few years ago. And some of that's just familiarity, the fact that the price points have come down, the fact that there's now a number of different brands you can buy in Australia, and the fact that their friend bought one and they went in it and were reasonably impressed. We don't have that yet with autonomous vehicles. A lot of the governments and researchers have been working really hard to familiarize people with autonomous vehicle tech. So we've had sort of tours of autonomous vehicle prototypes, and people have generally been pretty receptive and excited about riding in one. So I think as people see more and more of them, they will become more familiar with the technology, and I think it will be fine.
So outside of, Elon Musk's Tesla, which other companies are seriously playing the game when it comes to autonomous vehicles?
That's a great question. If you'd asked who were the key players in autonomous vehicles 5 or 10 years ago, I could have given you a list of hundreds. When the technology was more expensive and took longer to develop, that really consolidated down to just a few small players, ones that had very big bank accounts. Arguably, the leader internationally right now is Waymo, which spun out of Google and has operations in a number of different US cities. There's a small number of other US-based players like Zoox and a few others. There are also automated trucking companies as well. And China has a lot of automated vehicle activity occurring, although I do not know as much of the details about their exact rollouts.
Okay, so big picture, how far off do you think it will be a reality that the average Australian, can jump in an autonomous taxi instead of an Uber?
I think that comes down to whether these things are going to earn enough money. And so the good news is they're widely enough deployed in the USA. They're offering a significant fraction of the rideshare or Ubers and taxis in some of the cities like San Fran and LA. And so those companies have pretty good numbers on whether they think they're going to earn enough money. As soon as they think they are, I suspect there'll be strong interest in moving to Australia. Australia is a very similar market in many respects to the United States, but I would expect it will become pretty clear in the next year or two whether it's going to be profitable enough.
Michael, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thanks so much for having me. I always love chatting about this topic.
That was Professor Michael Milford there, Director of the Queensland University of Technology Centre for Robotics. And that's it for this episode of The Briefing. Before you go, though, we'd love it if you could share this ep with someone else you think might enjoy it as well. It really is one of the easiest ways you can support everything we do here at The Briefing. And you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Helen Smith. Catch you next time.
Listener.